Hi, I'm Mary Gunn. Welcome to Fun University.
Hello, I'm Mary Gunn of Mary Gunn Fun, founder and head professor of Fun University. Welcome to FUNNdamentals, Heat Embossing. This is a series that we're doing that is basically what I wish I had known when I first started. The heat embossing was my first, oh my gosh, that is so much fun. I've got to play with these things. Experience with paper crafting, the modern age of paper crafting, i.e. 1997. Can you believe that's modern? But it is to me. So anyway, so if you were to come to my house and you came to my studio and said, "Hey Mary, I have never heat embossed. What do I need to know? What can you tell me?" This is what I would tell you. Okay, we're going down to paper and we'll talk about the stuff first. Okay, there are things that you kind of need for heat embossing. Basically, what you're doing is taking a sticky ink, sprinkling these little teeny tiny plastic powdery beads on it, powder, heating it with this heat tool, and I suggest making yourself a little heat platform until it melts. That's basically what embossing is. There's lots of other things that you can do. There's lots of options within each one of those items, except heat tools mostly are the same. Some of them are probably safer now than they used to be. This one is pretty old, and when you see it heat up, you can see the coil get red, and you can see that I've got it in some embossing when it was still wet. But so it gets super hot. You don't want that thing blowing in your face to test it, because it really is uncomfortable, and you don't want it to hold it because you can burn your fingers. You definitely want to definitely not a little kid thing. Well, I'm not going to say definitely, probably, because that kind of cuts itself out. But I would not let a little kid emboss without me being right there and probably then taking over. But those are the things you need for embossing. What can you emboss? Well, I mostly emboss papers. You can emboss wood, chipboard, cloth, leather, metal, glass, ceramics. I don't really know what all you can emboss, but I know you can emboss those things. You can, which is just melting plastic on whatever you're working with. A couple other things that you might want are some embossing pens, which have the sticky ink in them. You can get bottles of embossing re-inker fluid. I've seen several people that have the little dauber. It's like a shoe polish dauber thing. I've seen several people that have had the paint spill out, which is a horrible mess. So I'm not so sure I wouldn't recommend it. You can also use pigment-based ink instead of dye-based ink, because the pigment-based ink stays wet longer. So if you have a black ink, for instance, that doesn't like to dry before you go and color, watercolor or Copic marker color or anything like that, if it's bleeding in, you can solve that with clear embossing powder, and you don't need this because it will catch on that wet pigment ink. Pigment ink. So those are some things that you can do. You can use stencils with them. You can use, I think I've even swinked with it before. You can emboss colors on colors. You can emboss black on black. You can emboss white on black, which is a real, very popular look. You can emboss any kind of color on white. You can use it for accents. You can use it with solid stamps. You can use it for layering. You can use it for outlining and painting and coloring then. It just makes little dams for things, and it will catch your watercolor so it won't go into the next little cell. You can do two tones. You can do resist with it. You can do a technique called broken glass. You can do a technique called Joseph's coat. You can do edging. You can even make gold paper or a metallic paper to match any kind of embellishments that you've made for your project. There are problems that can come up. This heat can make the paper curl. You can actually burn paper, such as like vellum will actually burn faster than a cardstock. So you can get singe marks, so you don't want that. I don't know if you could actually burn a hole in it, but I would think that would be conceivable. But you can have curling paper. You can have burned skin. We don't want that. You can put your fingers on the powder before it's heated and have to re-powder. You can put your fingers on the melted powder while it's still wet and mess it up. You can make, if you have a mat, I know that one from Close to My Heart, I think I ruined 3 of them. It would curl when I would emboss on it. So it would bend, and I think people talked about putting it in the oven and things like that, but I never did. So there's different things like that. You can use stencils with it. You can use clear embossing. There's just so many things. One of my favorite things is just using clear embossing on a whole card front, and it's just beautiful. And you can make it, you can also, anyway, we'll get into what we can do, but I do want to just show you a couple more things that you might like to have for heat embossing. One thing that is very recommended is an anti-static bag. This one is one I made, and it just has cornstarch and baby powder in it. I also just put some cornstarch and baby powder in this little tin, and you can just put it on. I used an old a clean makeup brush. Maybe I can do it. Whoa, look at it go, look at it go. And then you just put it on there to keep the little strays of beads from clinging because they're statically connected or attracted, kind of like slips. Remember slips? Another thing that you may want is to have a lint remover. Because when you spill, then you can just do the lint remover right over that, or a Swiffer cloth, and pick up all the little pieces, because it gets real annoying when it's on your work surface. Also, to that point, when you have a piece, when you are going to be pouring things on, I've already done the powder. Let's go ahead and just use our sticky ink. You stamp just like you would do any other stamping. And then you can see, can you see that little thank you right down there? It's just sticky right there. Couple things you can do so that you don't get powder all over your table. If you have a color that you use all the time, you can put it in a little Tupperware like this, and then it goes right back in for the next time. You can also flick it off, and if you have a little bit of a little stiff brush, you can get those little pieces off, because they will melt right on your paper too. Or if you have a little tool, a little pokey tool, you can get right in there and get those few little specks out. Here's something else. Make sure you cover this up. Clean before you heat anything. Yeah. Make sure you also cover that up before you turn this on, because this thing blows hot air. It's like convection oven, so to speak. So this is my little heating platform. I made them. I just used a piece of cardboard, chipboard, inside like a carton, and then covered it with aluminum foil, which does reflect or conduct heat. And what you can do if you haven't heated up yet is you can just heat up that aluminum foil while you're waiting for your heat tool to get heated. And the theory is that you then heat from the front and the back a little bit so that it heats faster without as much curling. Another thing that a lot of people like to heat from the back, you can't do that on the heating platform because you would knock all the powder off. But you do, some people like to heat from the back. You should probably turn it off. There we go. Because sometimes the heat, the air that's hot will blow off some of the looser pieces. But it doesn't take very long when it's a thin little thing and you've heated it up real well. And the way you know that it's done is it just changes its look. I have some embossing powder. Yep, oh dear. Well, maybe I'll have some bumps now, Sherry. So now I know what you're talking about. So anyway, you can see that it melts and it has a different look. It gets shinier and not so pebbly. And then once it just doesn't take very long to dry, especially when it's this thin. But you don't want to touch that when it's hot because it actually kind of burns and it can smudge. So that's one thing. When you're thinking about stamps to emboss, one thing I would warn against are stamps that are really small like this. See how small that writing is, wishing you the best? There are detailed powders, and you can certainly try those with something like this. But sometimes this Versamark pad is it's a foamy one. And so when you are getting the ink, it can pick up a little bit more than you want, unless it's a really, really deep stamp. And then it will get filled in the holes. And then if you like that look, that's cool. But just be forewarned, you may be better off with something that's a little bigger and more open. So yeah, that's a couple things. Another we can do this guy and see how he turns out. I don't know if I've even cleaned him, but it's not a felt, it's a spongy pad. It's not, there are other pads besides Versamark too, by the way. Lots of companies make them. Ranger makes them. I think Wow makes them. You can get different companies. Powder, I don't have any information on any of them. Embossing powder can get old and quit sticking. It's a terrible shame, and you don't usually, you buy a package about this size and it's going to last a long time. I don't know if I've run out of anything. I think my black I think it was my black that I ended up not being able to finish because it got bad. And I think my gold I want you to see gold though, because gold's so cool. Okay, I also want to show you something else. This is something else. If you don't have the little container to do it just on top of a folded piece of paper, we don't want this powder all over carnation and back. Pieces right there. Now in the winter too, when the static electricity is higher, you're gonna have more of a problem. See how that's stuck? You just wipe it off. It's not stuck with ink, it's just stuck with static electricity. And then you can just put that inside. Now if you don't have a bin for it, this is, how I use my watercoloring, how I have a bin with the water in it. Well, I would also suggest that when you're pouring, when you have this all full of powder and you're going to pour it back into this little tiny jar, I would suggest having another piece of paper, scratch paper, or a coffee filter underneath that jar, just in case all of a sudden you have a hiccup, or somebody comes in and surprises you, or you just miss. And that way you'll save your desk a little bit more too. Okay, Let's see. This one shouldn't take very long either because it's thin. See how the paper is starting to curl? The heat that is being blown into the paper has to do something. It doesn't just, see, my gold is old too. It's starting to not stick. I should just throw it away because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It works a little bit. But gold, the metallics are just like, they're the bomb. Also, when they get old, I think sometimes they get a little powdery, a little more powdery, and so that you end up with smudgy. I can see the smudging right here. And it's just because of the old gold. I'm going to get rid of my gold. Oh, that's so sad. I hate throwing things away. You can definitely see where it is melted, though. You don't want to stay in one place till it burns, but you do want to stay so that you don't waste that heat that you've already blown on it. We're good. Your heat gun shouldn't get hot on the outside either. It should be safe. So there we go. There's our pretty little bird. It could be, Patty, the Versamark could be dried up, but I know that it's not because that is a pretty new pad. So in this case, it is not, but it could be. Let me find a water pen here. I know I have some right here somewhere. There we go. Let me show you how, just with regular inks, how fun this is. This is like so much fun. This is qualify as stash busting Patty ass or Sherry ass. Me throwing away old product? Yes, I think so. That is definitely stash busting. So this just has this oh, there's a booger on my pen. This just acts as a little outline, and it will help you stay in the lines and keep your paints from going from one place to the other. And this is not watercolor paper. If you're going to do watercolor paper, I would use a stamp positioner because the watercolor paper is probably going to be, this is bad, looking bad though, it's probably going to be pretty bumpy or porous or have some texture to it. And if you're going to have a line that you don't want to have water going out of that line, you'd want to make sure it's really very nicely inked. I think you'll get a better image. That blue, that isn't this paper. I don't even know what paper it is, but it's not the best. But it's sure fun. And I'm going over the lines. It's not the paint or the little blocks as much as me. But it still makes it so that, you know, when you paint, oftentimes with an opaque paint, it will cover up the ink lines too. So if you have this, if you have embossed lines, then it's going to act as a resist and you won't paint over it. So you can still see it, which is a whole technique. There we go. Look how cute he is. So those are a couple little things. You can heat emboss die cuts. You can heat emboss stamped images. Let's see. Do I have a little? Here's one that I love to do. Okay, here's a pretty little cupcake, but he's kind of matte. He's not very fancy. So one of my favorite things to do is to take that Versamark, as soon as I find it, there it is, and just go over the whole thing. Oops, it's bleeding because I didn't anticipate that, but it's okay. I can cut it out now. I can just change my plan. It's fine. Doctor, the patient is bleeding. And then take a clear embossing paper or powder. Trying to find everything. I'll just do this. No, I'll do this. Ooh, Molly, looky there. An old one. And just cover the whole thing with clear embossing. So if I were getting embossing powders, they aren't terribly expensive. They do last a long time. I think I would get clear. I would get black. And I would get my favorite metal. Oh, looky there. I didn't stick it real well there. So I'm going to come back. Oh, nope. I'm going to do that after I do this. Okay. So I can feel the powder right here. I am so paranoid about knocking this stuff over. And there we go. Another thing for anti-static that people sometimes use are like the sheets, dryer sheets. I don't have much of an opinion about it one way or the t'other. I don't think they'd be great, but I don't know. Anyway, this will give it a whole, just this shiny, clear covering on the whole thing. It looks so cool. If you were going down the aisle at the grocery store looking for a card and you saw one that had a shiny finish on it like this, they would charge you more and it would be a real eye catcher. And so now it's shiny. I think there are some places right in here that didn't get hit real well. So what we can do with that is take a pen, get placed there too, and just fill it in with the embossing pen. Go back over it with some more powder. You can also do this in techniques that you go over and over until you get this great big thick embossed coolness going on. That's a whole nother story. If this was still hot and juicy, melty, you could go ahead and stick more powder on it too, but usually that works after several layers, not just one layer. I just used a different powder. There's my paranoia. But it's a safety thing. I think it's a good thing. I do have a little. There we go. We're good now. And we've done other tricks throughout our classes, and you can look and see if there's any embossing tags, and maybe go back and find some more tips. But isn't that cool? Look at, pardon me, there it is without the shine. It is with the shine. So it's just a fun thing to make it look like an enamel shape, or you can make it look like an enameled shape or faux metal. You can make two tones. You can make really cool die cut names, words. You can do a lot of things with the heat embossing for not too much expense. And make sure you use your coupon if you're going to Michael's or Joann's or Hobby Lobby, and get that guy, because he's like $30, probably $40. But he should last a long time too. So anyway, I hope you have fun with heat embossing. I've always loved it. My first card that I made at a dots party involved gold heat embossing, and I was sold. There was no turning back. I had to make cards forever and ever, and that's what I've pretty much done 23 years later. Thank you for listening. If you do have any comments or questions, just go over to the discussion. We'll find out what they are and help you out if we can. Thank you so much, and have a great night.